Today, Prime Minister Mark Carney broke ground on a new mine located around 120 kilometers north of Montreal.
In 1 year, we have signed 56 agreements on critical minerals with more than 10 countries because they know the world needs reliable partners in a dangerous world. And we know that entrepreneurs, such as those gathered here today, need predictability in the age of uncertainty.
Mark Carney just approved a graphite project that could feed the battery industry for decades, and global manufacturers noticed immediately. The new Matawinie mine in Quebec is expected to become the largest natural graphite operation in the G7. Construction is already beginning. Panasonic is tied into the supply chain. Federal financing is flowing in, and Ottawa is openly talking about building a complete mine-to-market battery ecosystem inside Canada. That matters because right now, the global EV industry has a problem. Countries can build battery factories, they can subsidize EV production, they can announce green energy plans every week. But without secure graphite supply, none of it works, and China still dominates that market. So while Washington keeps fighting tariff wars and Europe scrambles to secure industrial materials, Canada just made one of the most aggressive battery supply moves in the Western world.
This week, Mark Carney traveled to Saint-Michel-des-Saints in Quebec to officially launch construction of the Matawinie graphite mine operated by Nouveau Monde Graphite. The project sits around 120 kilometers north of Montreal and is expected to produce more than 106,000 tons of natural graphite annually over a 25-year period. The company says part of that production will be converted into battery anode material for Panasonic Energy through a processing facility between Montreal and Quebec City. That detail is important because Ottawa is not presenting this as a simple mining operation. The federal government helped coordinate financing through multiple agencies, including Export Development Canada, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and the Canada Growth Fund. Officials also helped secure long-term purchasing agreements and international investment partnerships involving Japanese and European stakeholders. According to company executives, the project moved from referral through the Major Projects Office to active construction in roughly 6 months. For Canada's mining sector, that timeline is unusually fast, and Carney used the announcement to send a broader message. He argued that Canada is becoming a preferred destination for industrial investment as global companies search for politically stable supply chains outside China.
The interesting part of this story started after the ceremony ended, because once investors looked past the political messaging, they saw something else. Canada is trying to solve one of the biggest weaknesses in the Western battery economy. Graphite rarely gets the same attention as lithium or rare earths, but it is one of the most essential materials inside lithium-ion batteries. In many EV batteries, graphite makes up a larger share of the battery by weight than lithium itself. And China dominates the sector. China controls most global graphite refining capacity and remains the primary supplier of battery-grade graphite used across the EV industry. That has become a serious concern for automakers and battery manufacturers over the past 2 years, especially after multiple supply chain disruptions and export control tensions involving strategic materials. So when Canada suddenly accelerates a major graphite project tied directly into North American battery manufacturing, the market sees more than a regional mining story. It sees a possible alternative supply route. And timing matters here. The United States has already spent billions subsidizing battery plants and EV manufacturing through industrial policy programs, but manufacturers are still struggling to secure long-term mineral supply contracts at stable prices. That gap creates pressure across the entire system. A battery factory without reliable graphite supply is basically an expensive building waiting for raw materials.
One reason this project advanced so quickly is because Ottawa approached it less like a mining file and more like industrial infrastructure. That distinction matters. Instead of simply approving permits and stepping away, the federal government assembled financing support, infrastructure coordination, procurement guarantees, and export financing around the project simultaneously. That reduced risk for investors at a time when commodity markets remain volatile and borrowing costs are still elevated globally. The company also secured a government graphite offtake agreement, reportedly covering around 30,000 tons over 7 years. That gives lenders and partners something extremely valuable in mining projects: predictable future demand.
And this is where the strategy starts looking broader than one mine. Ottawa is effectively trying to build a vertically integrated battery material economy using Quebec hydroelectricity, critical minerals, processing facilities, and long-term industrial partnerships. That approach is attracting attention because many Western governments are struggling to do the same thing fast enough. In the United States, battery supply chains are facing growing pressure from tariff uncertainty and rising manufacturing costs. A recent Center for Automotive Research estimate suggested Trump's latest auto tariffs could add more than $100 billion in costs across the American auto industry in 2025. That affects battery production too, because every disruption tied to parts, minerals, transportation, or cross-border sourcing eventually pushes costs higher for EV manufacturers. Canada sees an opening there. The pressure is already spreading beyond automakers themselves. Reuters reported that Trump's 25% auto tariffs now cover more than $460 billion worth of vehicle and parts imports flowing into the United States annually. Analysts at Goldman Sachs estimate U.S. vehicle deliveries could fall by roughly 1 million units in 2025 as higher production costs ripple through the market. Other forecasts expect American vehicle prices to rise between $2,000 and $4,000 over the next year, while some imported models could climb far higher. That creates a very different business environment from the one Canada is trying to sell. Ottawa is offering long-term supply agreements, hydro-powered industrial production, and direct financing coordination at the exact moment American manufacturers are warning about cost shocks, production disruptions, and supply chain instability. For global battery investors deciding where to lock in future materials access, those differences suddenly matter a lot more than political speeches.
But there is still a major problem hanging over the entire project. Mining graphite is not the same thing as controlling the battery supply chain. Processing capacity remains heavily concentrated in China, and building refining infrastructure in North America is expensive, energy-intensive, and politically complicated. Canada also faces domestic pressure around environmental reviews, indigenous consultation, labor shortages, and infrastructure bottlenecks. Even supporters of the project acknowledge that scaling multiple mines simultaneously will not be easy, and global competition is accelerating quickly. The United States wants domestic manufacturing, Europe wants strategic autonomy, China wants to protect market share. Japan and South Korea are securing long-term supply agreements wherever they can. That means Canada now faces pressure to prove this model can actually scale beyond one successful project. Because if processing facilities, transportation infrastructure, and skilled labor do not expand at the same pace, the supply chain advantage could narrow quickly.
Right now, heavy equipment is moving into Quebec, while Ottawa celebrates the project as proof that Canada can build strategic industries faster than before. And for the battery sector, the announcement landed at exactly the right moment. Manufacturers are searching for stable suppliers. Investors want politically reliable jurisdictions. Governments are racing to secure materials before the next supply shock hits. Canada is trying to position itself directly in the middle of that scramble. But the next phase will matter more than the announcement itself. Can Canada turn one graphite mine into a full battery material network? Can Ottawa build refining capacity quickly enough to compete with Asia? And if North America's EV future increasingly depends on Canadian minerals, Canadian electricity, and Canadian financing support, how much leverage does that eventually give Ottawa inside the broader industrial relationship with the United States?
A confidant, indeed, of the Chancellor of Germany has raised the idea of a potential World Cup boycott in a German newspaper. This politician, Jürgen Hart, had said dropping out the tournament would only be considered as a last resort in order to get Trump to see sense on the Greenland issue, pointing out that Trump has made it clear how important the World Cup is to him.
Germany has just dropped a bombshell on the world's biggest sporting event, a World Cup boycott aimed directly at the United States, triggered not by football, but by Donald Trump's campaign to pull Greenland into America's strategic orbit. What began as a political provocation between Washington and Copenhagen has now exploded into a crisis threatening to destabilize the entire 2026 World Cup, and the ripple effect is spreading fast. One by one, European nations are reassessing whether they can, in good conscience or even in good security, compete on American soil while Trump turns the tournament into a stage for geopolitical leverage. Yet in the middle of this escalating storm, something remarkable is happening. As Europe looks for a way to stand its ground without abandoning the competition altogether, Canada suddenly emerges as the quiet alternative, the dependable co-host that isn't dragging world football into a diplomatic confrontation. What started with Germany's warning may soon reshape the entire map of the 2026 World Cup, separating the politically charged American venues from the stable, trusted Canadian ones.
The controversy erupted when influential German political voices began openly questioning whether their national team should refuse to play matches on American soil. This wasn't a fringe sentiment. It reflected a genuine frustration inside Europe over Washington's growing readiness to use the World Cup as an extension of foreign policy. Germany's warning created shockwaves almost instantly. Within days, similar questions surfaced in the UK, Scotland, France, and even the Netherlands, all countries that normally treat World Cups as untouchable. And the spark that ignited this movement was Trump's insistence that Greenland, a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, is essential to U.S. national security. The idea of pressuring an ally to concede territory was explosive enough, but when Trump linked his Arctic ambitions with economic threats and diplomatic leverage, European governments saw something much larger at stake: the erosion of long-standing norms within NATO and the broader international system.
This is a World Cup during particularly difficult, politically fraught times, where even if you are a citizen of a nation that will be allowed in, as far as we know, there's no guarantee of your safety.
At the same time, fans and supporters raised separate concerns that had been building since 2025, from stringent U.S. visa restrictions to the lingering anxiety around unpredictable immigration enforcement. The fear wasn't theoretical. Several African and South American supporter groups already warned that they might not be able to travel safely or in adequate numbers. This led many federations to an uncomfortable conclusion. Participating in a North American World Cup is one thing, participating specifically in Trump's America is another. And because the tournament is shared across 3 countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, Europe began asking whether a boycott had to be total at all. Why not avoid the American venues and continue the competition in cities that aren't defined by political confrontation? That question, more than anything, reshaped the conversation.
From the moment Trump revived his interest in acquiring Greenland, the reaction across Europe was a mix of disbelief and strategic anxiety. Denmark immediately rejected the idea, calling Greenland's sovereignty non-negotiable. Several Arctic and NATO analysts highlighted the destabilizing effect of linking territorial ambition with a major international event. Rather than separating diplomacy from sport, Trump blurred the lines entirely, sending a clear message that he viewed the World Cup as a stage to amplify American power. That shift in tone had consequences. The United States was no longer seen simply as a co-host. It was seen as a political actor trying to imprint its agenda onto the tournament. European officials feared that participation could be interpreted as tacit acceptance of Washington's approach, an outcome they were unwilling to risk. The reaction from Germany captured that sentiment most clearly. When German officials described the World Cup as leverage that could be used to force Washington to see sense, it signaled a broader realization. The tournament itself had become part of the geopolitical equation. While Greenland was the spark, the deeper frustration runs much broader. Across multiple countries, European football associations and their governments quietly share the same concern. The United States under Trump is unpredictable. Visa rules change with little warning. Enforcement can be aggressive. Stadium security policies remain unclear. And the political climate inside the U.S. oscillates between polarization and unrest. For many officials, this is not a question of ideology, but of logistics and safety. They need to guarantee that fans can enter, travel, and attend matches without fear of detention or confrontation. They need clear rules and stable conditions, 2 things that have been in short supply. This explains why many of these federations did not talk about abandoning the tournament altogether. Instead, they began exploring the idea of shifting their presence to Canada or Mexico, where the political controversy does not exist. That's the subtle but important distinction. Europe isn't rejecting the World Cup. Europe is rejecting the risks attached to Trump's version of it. Greenland's position in this story matters to Canada in a profound way. Ottawa has long worked with Copenhagen on Arctic governance, shared defense strategies, and environmental management. Trump's claim that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security wasn't just provocative, it threatened a balance Canada has spent decades reinforcing.
That's why Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, responded by emphasizing the need for predictable, rules-based cooperation in the Arctic. Without directly attacking Washington, Carney positioned Canada alongside Denmark and other northern partners who reject the idea of territorial bargaining. In Europe, this stance did not go unnoticed. As Washington escalated the rhetoric, Canada became the calm, steady voice calling for restraint. For countries considering a boycott, this contrast matters. It reinforces the notion that avoiding U.S. venues is not abandoning the World Cup, it's avoiding unnecessary risk while respecting international norms that Canada openly supports. As the debate expanded, a pattern became clear. European teams and supporters repeatedly framed their concerns around American politics, not the tournament itself. That left Canada in an unusually strong position. It is a host nation without the controversy, without the diplomatic tension, without the immigration barriers, and without the geopolitical theatrics. Canada offers simplicity, straightforward entry rules, stable public order, and a political climate not defined by confrontation. For federations balancing diplomatic principles with the desire to compete, this is exactly what they need, a way to participate without endorsing Washington's strategy or exposing their supporters to uncertainty. Some commentators in Europe have already described 2026 as a split World Cup, where the American segment becomes politically charged, while the Canadian and Mexican segments become the functional heart of the tournament. Whether that prediction proves accurate will depend on what Europe decides, but the direction of travel is unmistakable.
Germany's unexpected challenge has forced the world to rethink what the 2026 World Cup actually represents. Instead of a moment of North American unity, the tournament is now a symbol of a larger confrontation between Trump's vision of power and Europe's insistence on stability and sovereignty. And in this battle, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The world may still want to play, just not in America. As more European nations explore alternatives, Canada rises naturally into the spotlight, a co-host untainted by controversy and aligned with the international norms that Europe is determined to defend. Trump sought to dominate the World Cup. Instead, he may be watching the tournament quietly shift northward toward the one host nation the world still trusts. Trump planned to dominate the World Cup. Instead, Canada is becoming the real host the world trusts.